William Daroff is the CEO of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, the leading umbrella group representing mainstream American Jewry. A key voice in Jewish advocacy, he plays a central role in shaping U.S. policy on Israel, combating anti-Semitism, and strengthening Jewish communal life. Previously, he served as the Senior Vice President for Public Policy and Director of the Washington Office for the Jewish Federations of North America. Welcome back to the ILTV News Podcast. I'm Maayan Hoffman, Executive Editor at ILTV, and I welcome you to our show. And welcome you, William. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Maayan. It's a pleasure to be back.
Of course. Now, you have talked about the strong alignment that we're seeing between Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and President Donald Trump. How does this relationship, do you think, impact the broader U.S.-Israel alliance? What is your take on how the Jewish community feels about it, especially given that the majority of Jews actually voted for former Vice President Kamala Harris?
I think that I'm here in Israel for the 50th mission of the Conference of Presidents. 50 years we've been coming on missions. And those 50 years and our relationship is symbolic of the relationship between the United States and Israel. It's a strong relationship, and it's one that is getting stronger and stronger. And I think that American Jews in general are thankful when there are times that the United States and Israel are aligned, when there's not separation between our two countries and our two governments. So certainly there may be disagreements about specifics of policy prescriptions, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about that. But in general, I think that we are happy when our two countries are headed in the same direction and are talking with each other, and when there's smiles. And that's what we saw during President Trump's visit to the hosting of Prime Minister Netanyahu this last week.
Sure. Now, Trump has put out this very bold plan, that, of course, we've gotten the most recent ultimatum that there will be all hell to pay if the hostages don't come out on Saturday. It looks like some of the negotiations and the phases are changing here. But in terms of the ultimate end goal, Trump has put out this idea that the Palestinians could be not forcibly necessarily, but moved to other countries, Jordan, Egypt, and maybe some other countries in the region, that the U.S. will somehow purchase or own the Gaza Strip, take it over, develop it. What does the organized Jewish community in America really think about this plan? What do you think about the plan?
I think that you would see a variety of opinions among American Jewish organizations and American Jewish leaders, and there were some that immediately came out criticizing it. There's some that immediately came out lauding the plan. I think in general that having a new breath of fresh air on this issue is a positive thing. For decades, the policy as it relates to Gaza has been spinning in circles, and no one has come up with a cogent day-after plan or a plan for what Gaza should look like, who's going to be in charge of it. And what President Trump has done
No one even has a plan for eradicating Hamas.
That includes eradicating Hamas, as far as we know. Now, there certainly are all sorts of discussions that are happening behind closed doors without bright lights. And in fact, a lot of these discussions are not helpful for the fate of the hostages. And we've seen in reports that have come out recently about how all of this Surus being front and center has not been good for the process. That being said, I think that having a situation where world leaders are taking another look at Gaza and trying to come up with their own solutions. President Trump has put out an idea. Let's see what ideas are out there. Where is the Arab world on this?
The Arab world outright rejected
in general, where is the Arab world on trying to ensure that the people of Gaza have a better life ahead, that Gaza can have some sort of future? Where are they on those issues? They've been totally AWOL. And when you look at other situations around the world where there are crises, populations do shift. And why Egypt somehow is able to put up a big wall and say that Gazans must stay in harm's way, I think is a problem. There's polling from before 10/7 that over 40% of Gazans would prefer to live somewhere else. And certainly Israel's opponents talked about the open-air prison that Gaza is. If, in fact, 40% of Gazans want to live somewhere else, why not encourage them, incentivize them, as the world leaders have done with refugees from Syria, from refugees from the Balkans, with Russian Jewish refugees, where countries take a certain number and try to bring them in. I think that, again, the specifics of what the president suggested during the press conference and since, and where we end up, I think will probably be very different. But the idea of having a new look at this situation, shaking it up a little, I think is not unhelpful. Again, we'll see how it plays in the negotiations. We'll see what happens on Saturday. God willing, hostages will continue to come out. But what was being done before clearly wasn't bringing us to the promised land. And we see that hostages are out now who were not free before this. And God willing, this will end us in a positive direction.
It's really, hopeful sentiments. And certainly, here in Israel, we need a little bit of hope, especially when you hear Hamas saying, okay, we're done and we haven't even made it to the end of phase one. I mean, clearly Hamas has some other, reasoning behind that, wanting more concessions or something, something up their sleeve why they would make such an announcement. Or they are, as we said, concerned that the state of the hostages will cause really strong backlash against them when we actually discover just how much torture they've undergone. Now, I was reading an article in Times of Israel that you actually interviewed with them recently. I'm assuming also in lead up to the Conference of Presidents' 50th anniversary conference here in Israel. And you mentioned that the potential for normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia would actually be the, quote, total victory over the chaos that Hamas has tried to sow on since October 7th and afterwards. I mean, it's a victory, but explain why that would be a total victory.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a play on words, and I was trying to be cute because of Prime Minister Netanyahu's continued focus on that verbiage about total victory. But what I was pointing to was that it seems clear now from intelligence that we've seen after the fact that part of what Sinwar was looking to do was to disrupt Saudi normalization, that the Biden administration was moving down a path with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, where it looked like there would be some normalization. And it was getting very close. Secretary Blinken, in fact, was supposed to be going to Saudi Arabia, I think on October 8th, in order to, again, try to cement the deal. And so the point I was trying to make to the Times of Israel was that this would be icing on the cake, that not only would Hamas be vanquished and Sinwar be dead, but his goal would be reversed, his goal of stopping Saudi normalization. That's what I meant by total victory. I think it is like icing on the cake, a cherry on top. It's certainly not, I think, the number one priority. The number one priorities need to be the return of the hostages and the ending of this conflict and the ending of Hamas's rule. But certainly the dividends that could flow from that would be a great part of the epitaph of Sinwar.
Now, I mean, when you're in D.C., you're super tied into the politics, the American Jewish community, but also on the Hill. And, you've probably heard in the previous administration, now in this administration, why are the hostages not home yet? There's a lot of different versions here. What is your take on that? Why did it take this long to get a deal? Did Trump really bring the deal about? And, what role does Israel play in all this?
It's really, Maayan, a good question for the historians. Except how it may influence getting the rest of them home. I think that there are a number of factors at play here. One is that the Hamas are suicidal and genocidal, and so the idea of killing them is not something that, as part of their groupthink, is something that they can say worries them. We know for sure they don't care about the lives of the civilians among them. Now, on an individual basis, when Israel makes people an offer they can't refuse, my guess is they're less interested in jihad and virgins and all that comes after death by that cause. I think that's a big piece of it. I think that, unfortunately, I think American policy was a piece of it, that at just the wrong time, the Biden administration pressured the Israeli government to relent a bit, to let in far more humanitarian goods, which certainly the people of Gaza deserve, but the
Hamas was
terrorists of Hamas certainly did not deserve, and it did bolster them.
But I just want to say that it's amazing. Even today, Hamas has said they're not going to release any more hostages, and trucks of aid were going in today. I mean, it seems to be, even in this administration, with its heavy hands and all the statements, we allow the aid to continue to go in to get to Hamas and allow Hamas to live.
In this specific case, the Israeli government has made the decision not to allow the threat of the hostages not being released on Saturday to hold up the other parts of the ceasefire agreement. Presumably, the idea is that between now and Saturday, the parties will come together such that Hamas will abide by the terms and maybe even abide by President Trump's terms of releasing all of them. And so from that point of view, I think it's important not to overreact. The bottom line is here, the hostages have to come out. If this is some sort of game now, As it relates to President Trump and Hamas's decision-making now, President Trump has had a pretty amazing 3 weeks as it relates to exerting American authority and power across the world. 3 countries in mind come to mind. One is Colombia, Canada, and Mexico. With all 3 of them, the president, via Twitter, Truth Social, actually, made some pretty intense threats. And within 2 Twitter cycles, all 3 of them relented. This is, in a Reagan-esque sort of way, exerting American authority and power. He's put down the gauntlet again here with Hamas for 12 o'clock on Saturday, as he did before he was inaugurated, when he said there'd be hell to pay if Hamas didn't release the hostages. I think that Hamas, Qatar, anybody else who has their hands in this needs to be thinking about Donald Trump on Saturday at 12 o'clock and what that means. And we don't know. No one yet. The Colombians, the Canadians, the Mexicans haven't decided to challenge him and play chicken. Everyone has blinked. So I would encourage the Israeli government to play this out through Saturday at 12 o'clock noon and not take that opportunity out because, again, God willing, we know these 3 who are going to come out now. I'm sure they can taste freedom. I can taste their freedom. I can taste the tears.
Just thinking about those hostages coming out on Saturday, all of them together. It's like amazing.
And so I think tiptoeing here between now and then will be important for the Israeli government. And I think it's time, as I said, for Hamas and its minders to see that there's a new sheriff in town and not to tempt it.
Yeah. Now, I want to bring up something maybe it's a little bit controversial, but here in Israel, not so many, by polls, most of the population does not really support Prime Minister Netanyahu, though he just went up a little bit in the polls. How do you feel in the American Jewish community? Are you feeling that the Americans are supportive of the Prime Minister at this stage?
That's the controversial question?
Well, no, the next one is more, but this is the one that leads to the controversial. I have to, work it in, work it slowly.
He's an interesting phenomenon. I think similar to here, where there are very diverse opinions and very strong opinions about Prime Minister Netanyahu. There are very diverse and strong opinions in the American Jewish community about Prime Minister Netanyahu. My guess is he's probably more popular in America because we don't get the 24/7 coverage that your colleagues in the news media give the Prime Minister, which is generally not very positive. And so it's a little less day-to-day in America as it relates to the Prime Minister. But he's certainly controversial, and I think that his popularity sort of comes and goes with how successful he's being. I would say that, like here in Israel, in America, he's certainly more popular since the pager, walkie-talkie sort of shift in how the conflict was going. Yeah. But he's controversial, and he's certainly controversial among Conference of Presidents organizations, where there's some that have a lot of disagreements with him.
Especially controversial that he came to America. He was there for an entire week. And he didn't meet with Jewish American leaders. He only met with evangelicals. I remember the Ron Dermer comments. Back in the days, evangelicals are more important than the liberal Jews. That was about maybe 10 years ago, right? 10 years ago that he said that, 2018, I think it was. So, here he is, an entire week. He met with some Jewish students. We're going to give him that. But what do you make of the decision to sit around the table with, more than a dozen Christian leaders and not to do it with you? That was the controversy.
That's the tough question. I'd rather talk about the Super Bowl.
We're not going to get to do that because I'm not like a big sports person, even though I'm from Kansas City, and the Chiefs, they lost terribly, but they played.
There you go. So, congratulations to them.
So that was our Super Bowl talk.
Okay. So you want to move on to a different subject?
Yes, no. Factual question.
It's a good question. I'll start by saying that Jewish organizations meet with the Prime Minister a lot. That he met with us the last 3 or 4 times he's been in America, the 2 times since October 7th and immediately before, that we meet with him here. And in fact, on this Sunday, the Conference of Presidents will be meeting with the Prime Minister. So there is a conversation, there is a dialogue. We talked to the Prime Minister's office and to the embassy in Washington about having a meeting with Jewish leaders, and it's something that was in play until probably towards the middle of his visit, when the clock just expired on the time.
Yeah, we had time for the Christians.
He met with them early. Ambassador-designate Huckabee was the one who arranged that and set that up, and I understand The reasoning for that, I'm glad they met with Jewish students. I am the Conference of Presidents, among other things, is a convener of organizations, particularly convening conversations with governments. So it's very much in our bread and butter. I wish there had been a meeting, but I don't think it's incredibly indicative of much other than the fact that the Prime Minister had a very busy schedule. And as we were looking at Friday, which is when the Jewish leaders meeting and the Jewish student leaders meeting ended up being, that Friday becomes problematic because of Shabbat and people getting back to New York and elsewhere. I'm certain there will be, including a week from Sunday, there will be a meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu and the American Jewish leadership, and I'm sure there will be on another trip too.
Okay. So, we've also seen in America, I was just there. Also, I was there for a couple of weeks, and there's so much here in Israel, we read a lot and in the Jewish newspapers, a lot about the rising anti-Semitism. I think you read about it a little bit less in the United States in the mainstream newspapers, certainly, locally when there are attacks. But there's definitely been a huge spike. New ADL statistics that came out were showing, incredible increases. Trump is trying to, or did pass, I think, this new act and bringing it to Congress, the updated act. And so tell me what your thoughts are, in terms of the role of the Conference of Presidents. Like, what role can you play to help with this crazy spike? I mean, it's something
right.
I feel like we've never seen in the United States before.
It is a crazy spike, as you say, and it flows in large part from 10/7, from the attention on the conflict here and from the anti-Israel agitators who are out there stirring things up. And among other things, just for the record, it solidifies the importance of the IRA definition of anti-Semitism.
Isn't that not being included, though, in the act?
In the president's new executive order, he does reiterate and re-energize the executive order that he had signed during his first term, which did recognize the IRA definition of anti-Semitism.
But it's not the legislation in Congress, right?
So
like
the legislation in
2025.
Congress is the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act,
right,
which does include the IRA definition, and which it hasn't passed yet. It was just reintroduced this session of Congress. It was just reintroduced last week by Congressman Gottheimer and Congressman Lawler and others, and in the Senate as well. By Senator Rosen, and Senator Schumer famously came on as an original sponsor as well. So it will move itself forward and does, among other things, solidify the IRA definition of anti-Semitism in law. But the definition importantly notes the connection between anti-Zionism, between anti-Israel animus, and anti-Semitism. And that's important, and that's something we've seen so clearly since 10/7 when, for instance, a Molotov cocktail is thrown through a synagogue window. A synagogue not connected to the State of Israel, a synagogue not connected to the IDF Central Command. This is a place where people are taking out their anti-Israel attitude on Jews, and we've seen that across the board, and particularly seen that on college campuses. The Conference of Presidents has been very engaged in convening Jewish organizations and those who are fighting anti-Semitism to ensure that we're all fighting in the same direction and that we're not stepping on each other's toes. There is so much work to be done that organizations really are collaborating in a way that I've never seen before.
Jewish organizations.
Post 10/7 organizations are very much engaging together. There's very little surus between them. We're very much collaboration, which I think is indicative of where the American Jewish community is in general. That we really on 10/7 had a first punch in the gut when we saw what was happening here, the devastation from the Hamas terror army's attack. And then the second punch in the gut is when we saw the response in America, where our neighbors, our erstwhile friends, the people that we thought would stand with us, who we stood with on legislation, on advocacy across the board, when we looked to our left and our right and they weren't there, I think that really brought about a resurgence of Jewish self-awareness and engagement that, among other things, has our Jewish organizations working well together. So working together, collaborating with them, leading on some of this legislation like the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, ensuring that the IRA definition is enshrined by more states. Now a majority of states have adopted it as their definition, and working with governments at all levels to try to ensure that they move the ball forward in combating anti-Semitism. A principal place here are university campuses, and the universities are much better this year than they were last year.
Really?
In part, that's because university administrators are enforcing their rules.
Do you think that's partly because all those top university presidents had to step down?
I think those congressional hearings where those three very prominent university professors were seen to be outrageously out of touch and out of tune did slap around mentally others who were in those positions. I think that the activities on the Hill and the U.S. Department of Education, starting with the Biden administration, turning up the energy, and the Trump administration has, in fact, just announced that they're going to investigate 5 more universities. And as distinct from any other president in history, the Department of Education is conducting these investigations on their own without there being someone having to file a complaint, which is how it's been in the past. So it's proactive. I think that the Jewish community is very focused on this. I think that as distinct from other times in our history as a people, we have government on our side. If you look in history, whether it was during the Inquisition when the royals were the ones who were trying to kill us or convert us, during the pogroms when it was the Tsar and the agents of the Tsars were part of the conspiracies, and certainly the Shoah, where the Nazi government machine was there. Now, in America, government is on our side. When we have issues, we can turn to them and work together, and that's something that worked well with the federal government in the last administration and continues today. The new executive order that President Trump signed on anti-Semitism, which you mentioned a moment ago, really includes focusing on these issues with steroids. All government agencies have to report on anti-Semitism issues within 60 days. There's a Department of Justice task force that has started. And importantly, as it relates to the college campuses, a recognition that under existing law, individuals who are on visas who provide material support for terror can have those visas revoked. So emphasizing that, and I think that's important. Again, there are a few of these provocateurs who are the problem, and I think by showing them that actions have consequences, we can really change the climate here.
I know you mentioned the government, you're right, is on the Jews' side, but do Jews feel safe in America at this stage? Do you think that Jews are scared?
I feel safe. I think that it's important to be a little scared. I feel like I've come up in the 9/11 environment and world where since 9/11 there have been police cars that are in front of my kids' day school, in front of our synagogue. So it's a little bit of the reality that we've had in America. I think that that it's important for us as a community to stay on our toes, and there are efforts underway as it relates to security by organizations like the ADL and Secure Community Network and CSS and others that are focused on ensuring that the Jewish community is safe. The interaction and engagement with government at all levels is important. The fact that we want to know our police chiefs before there is an issue, and I think that the community is much more attuned. And when there are episodes here in Israel, when things get hotter, things do get hotter for us in America, and we're on our toes.
Wow. I want to kind of go backwards to something else that you mentioned, which was this Jewish unity, but also the fact that your neighbors, as you said, the organizations that the Jewish community has historically really worked very close with, whether it's women's organizations or LGBT organizations or others, that they really didn't stand with the Jewish people. They abandoned Israel and the Jews, despite how much partnership there has been in the past. What do you make of that? I mean, what happens when this will, God willing, die down, right? God willing, the hostages will come hopefully
Amen.
Saturday, maybe,
Amen.
Sometimes, within the next bit of time, and the war will end, and all of a sudden people start to forget because, that's the way of the world. So do you go back to working with them again, or are you ever able to trust them again?
That's a really good question. I think I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt. I believe in working with allies on specific issues when our interests collide. I have in this job met with more dictators than you could imagine, but whose interests at any given moment may align with those of the American Jewish community. And I'll meet with anybody if I think that it will help a Jew, if it will free a Jew, if a Jew will live who otherwise wouldn't. And that being said, these women's organizations that you mentioned, for instance, that have minimized and denied up to a point the horrific crimes against women that were conducted on 10/7. I think Sheryl Sandberg and those efforts have helped to shift things, and a lot of the mainstream organizations have issued a couple statements that they hadn't issued otherwise. But in speaking to my colleagues who are involved with them, the climate is one where they feel very much, as they would say, othered, that it's a combat zone when they go into them. It would certainly take me a long time to sit at a table with someone who would deny what's happened to our people. That being said, if connecting with them will help free some Jews or move forward an agenda in a way that is significant, I'm sure we will be there, but our eyes will be very open, and I think it probably will be a much higher price of entry in order for us to engage with them.
Makes sense. And with that, I mean, with this resurgence of Jewish unity, I was speaking to Julie Platt. I think you and I spoke about it even afterwards with another hat, about this kind of like born-again Jew, this idea that Jews are coming back and really connecting again, just even to their community and faith as a result of 10/7. And that, I guess my question today would be, this many months later, 16 months later, are you still feeling that people want to reconnect? Is that connection lasting? And do you see that actually shifting the nature of the American Jewish community? I mean, finally, something may be out of this war for the positive.
Right. Julie Platt, when she received the award from President Herzog, talked about this at great length and talked about it articulately. And I do believe that it continues, that on October 8th, again, as we looked and saw that our neighbors weren't there with us, what we did see is that we as a Jewish people need to stand together, that at the end of the day we can count on each other, and that we are stronger as a people when we are unified. And so we have seen, and it continues, more people going to synagogue services, more people being involved with Jewish organizations and going into JCCs. More conversions continue. I hear from mostly from conservative and reform rabbis that there are more conversions that are happening. People who have been thinking about it and have decided that now is the time, or
that's
people
super
whose
interesting. I actually have to remember that.
Or people whose neshamas have sort of clicked as they see what's happened out there. And I think that the devastation of October 7 and what followed it on a negative side, and I don't think anything good can flow from October 7th, just definitionally. But that being said, I think it has clarified for a lot of people what's important and who's important and who they can count upon.
Yeah. So I want to bring up just this new faith office that opened, going back to the administration with Paula White, Reverend Paula White leading it. Right. I was reading the establishment, the paper about what it's going to entail, and mostly it seems that it will obviously impact local religion and state issues, politics, the politicalization, let's call it, of religion. Again, they're going to be very intertwined under Trump. In some ways, this is very good. It's good for the Jews to, have faith on the radar, be around the table. In other ways, it could be bad for the Jews. There's definitely a very Christian bent to this. What are your thoughts on this office? How do you think it's going to impact Jews day to day?
I saw that she had been appointed, Pastor White, and I've had a little interaction with her over the years. The first time that a president established an Office of Faith-Based and Community Services was President George W. Bush, as part of his efforts to bring about compassionate conservatism. And the idea was that in every federal agency there would be an office that was focused on faith-based initiatives. And that continued through George W. Bush, and then when President Obama was in office, he continued them. They shifted a little bit. They were a little sort of less about a right-wing agenda and more about a sort of left-wing agenda of bringing together community groups and community organizers on behalf of that agenda. And then when Trump was in last time, it shifted, and Biden also had them. So I don't think it's all that headline stopping. I think that in general, again, the agenda items they push may or may not be ones that the Jewish community would be supportive of in any administration, and particularly if there was an evangelical bent, say at the Department of Health and Human Services, where they were talking about reproductive health sort of issues. Many members of the Jewish community wouldn't be pleased by that. But in general, having someone in every agency who is a first line for the religious community has been good for the Jewish community. Because when an issue has come up, say there's an issue about kosher meals on wheels that just pops up, there is someone at the Department of Health and Human Services who is tasked with talking to religious organizations. And so the folks at the Jewish Federations, whoever it is who'd be engaging in that issue, have an address to get into. The same at other agencies. So in general, it's been positive, and I think we'll see, though, obviously, how it plays out and how the Trump administration utilizes this network.
Right. I mean, certainly I would think, even though it's not a direct line in terms of impact on Israel, it will have an impact having, Paula White have such a strong role, in the administration. This is a very formalized role for her. She obviously had a role, in the previous administration, but this is much more prominent. And given the Huckabee appointment and this idea of the, biblical view of the state of Israel, she's on a task force to be able to push sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. She was, from what I understand, from her, the last call that Trump made before he moved the embassy, that he was, deciding, and there was this whole, 80 leaders calling and threatening World War III, and next thing he has to make a decision, and she said, you must do it, and he said, okay, and he signed, because of her. So I was thinking about how that could also have just a tremendous amount of impact, in terms of her influence on some of the offices and leadership in the Trump administration.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think there's as it relates to Israel policy, the team that's surrounding the president, from Secretary of State Rubio and National Security Advisor Waltz, Ambassador-designate Huckabee that you mentioned, John Ratcliffe, the CIA director, the Secretary of Defense, all have very solid pro-Israel records, have very good connections here to the State of Israel and with the State of Israel. And I'm hopeful that will lead towards a policy that is a consistent policy and a policy that is similar to what we've seen over these last 3 weeks of the two countries being in sync, and certainly being in sync as it relates to speaking in public. I'm very much a supporter of, first, the U.S. and Israel having no daylight between them. I think that it makes Israel stronger and makes America stronger for our adversaries to see that we speak as one. But secondly, there inevitably will be disagreements, that those disagreements are aired in private and not in public. I think that when they are aired in public, it lessens the bond. It lessens the perception of the bond by American and Israel's adversaries, and that's a problem for America and Israel. And I think that what we've seen over these last 3 weeks is a change in tone, for sure, as distinct from the previous administration, where there was a lot of public criticism over a long period of time over some very serious issues. And so I'm hopeful that this new team will take a page from the previous Trump administration, and when they have disagreements, pick up the phone.
Amazing. Well, William Daroff, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, Maayan.